what I tell people is we only appreciate persistence in reverse. When it's happening, we call it stubbornness. When you win, they call it persistence.
Weird is wonderful and weakness is strength, says today's Ask an Expert guest. Hi, I'm Joshua Carlsen, co-founder of Propelo Media, and today I have the distinct pleasure of speaking with David Rendall. He's the author of a book called Freak Factor, and it's all about distinguishing your uniqueness by flaunting your weakness. I know it seems radical, and stay with me, it is, but David's going to take the time to show you how you can apply these concepts to flip the self-improvement culture on its head and really give you meaningful action to maximize what you already have. Now let's hear what David has to say.
David, welcome to Ask an Expert podcast.
I'm excited to be here.
Cool. Thank you. So you have coined discovering uniqueness by flaunting weakness. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I grew up my whole life getting in trouble because I couldn't sit still and be quiet and do what I was told. And then eventually I ended up becoming a professional speaker where I get paid to stand up, not to sit down. I get paid to talk, not to be quiet. And I get paid to run my own business, not to do what other people tell me to do. And so what I learned was that my weaknesses were actually strengths. They were weaknesses, but they were also strengths. And that same thing is true for other people. And so flaunting means to parade without shame. It means to be unapologetic. And so the way people tried to and still try to control us, to control people, to influence others is to shame you for what you're doing that's inappropriate, ineffective, unprofessional, however they frame it, or just flat out wrong, right?
Right.
And so I'm encouraging people to not be ashamed and to flaunt those things, to amplify those things. So I didn't succeed by moderating my talking, by moderating my activity level, by toning down my desire to run my own life. I actually succeeded by amplifying all of those things, by embracing them and turning up the volume on those things. And I show other people how that can be true for them as well. And so that word flaunting really ties that all together, that too often we go, oh, well, my boss said, my spouse said, my kids said, my friends said, my coworker said, so I guess I'm too much of this or I'm not enough of that. And sometimes those criticisms can be legitimate, but too often all they're doing is pointing out the downside of our biggest strength or a downside, a disadvantage related to something. You know, somebody told me I'm 6'6", 6'9" in heels, and I did a presentation once, and when the lady who was managing it was introduced to me, her first words out of her mouth were not like hello, they were "you're too tall." And I think that's emblematic of what I'm talking about. People's initial reaction to us is like, oh, you're too intense, or you're too analytical, or if you could just I love how organized you are, but if you could just dial it back.
Right.
That response is just them saying, I'm uncomfortable with you.
Right.
And then we take it as, I'm bad, I'm wrong, I should fix it. I'd be a better person if I could find just the right amount, but who decides what just the right amount is and all those kinds of things. So yeah, I'm a fan of flaunting those things that people see as your weaknesses, which is going to cause people to see you as a freak.
Okay, and I saw you say once, basically weirdness is wonderful.
Yeah.
And as I saw you talk about this, one of the things that resonated with me is basically aligning, right? So, you know, to the woman that said you're too tall, right? Like maybe she wasn't the right audience for you.
Yeah.
Because there's people that love tall people. You know, there's people that love idiosyncrasies. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so one of the ways that we can find how our weaknesses might be strengths is to not think of things as just a weakness or a strength, but to think of things as situational, right? So when you're 6'6", you're not too tall to play basketball, right? In fact, you're a little bit small to play basketball. Notice how the situation really changed that, right? Like, oh, 6'6", is that it? You're not 6'10", you're not 7 feet. And so, you know, oh, you talk too much. Not when you're on stage and you were hired to and it was your job. You know, you're hyperactive. That's at school when you're a kid. But now I do Ironman triathlons. I do ultramarathons. And nobody says, oh, that's too much. Most people say, oh, my gosh, wow, I could never do that. I wish I was more active. I wish I was more motivated. Right. And so those situations are the things that really, so when I was in school, the situation was sit still, be quiet, do what you were told. And then everybody predicted that since I was bad at those things, I was going to fail for the rest of my life. You're failing now, you're going to fail later. But what they missed was the situation changes, and it changes dramatically. Look what's happening right now with COVID-19. Kids are having to go do school at home, do online school, do some kind of hybrid school, do some kind of work from home. And some kids who used to be doing poorly are doing well because the situation changed.
Right.
And other kids that used to be doing well are doing poorly because the situation changed. So characteristics are not static. They have the impact of the situation on how people see us is really, really huge. And once we see that, we can stop saying, oh, I have this weakness that I need to fix. We say, wait a second. Is there potentially a situation where that's not only not a weakness, but a massive strength when I put myself into that situation? And so I don't need to get better by changing or fixing myself. I get better by moving myself into situations that put the spotlight on the best things about me.
Cool. And I love that, because that is, to your point, right? And I love the basketball. I'm a sports guy, so I love that analogy, right? 6'6" is great in basketball, but suddenly you're in basketball and 6'6" may not be as great anymore, right? It just depends on what environment you're in. Another thing that you talk about, which I really love, is avoidance, right? And so if I know that this is an area that maybe I'm not that great in, then maybe I don't focus on that. And immediately when I thought of this, I thought of Southwest Airlines, right? They're like, hey, we're not good at all of these things. We just know what we're good at. So we're going to forget everything else that, is traditional.
Yeah. Well, that's part of being unapologetic. I mean, one step worse than apologizing is then trying to fix that thing that everybody said was bad or wrong about you, when I'm saying you should actually be turning up the volume on that. So I want people to accept who they are and then appreciate it to the point that they can find that alignment, right? Find that fit, find that right spot, which means not trying to fit in all the other places, not trying to do all of those different kinds of activities, being willing to say, that's not really my thing. That's not really for me. That's not an area where I can really excel. I'm just not going to bother. Just like a company can do that, a person can do that sort of thing as well. And I think that's the difficulty is you can get to that point and be like, yeah, but don't I need to work on it a little bit? Don't I need to fix it? And it's like, no, not only do you not need to work on it a little bit, you need to completely let it go. Again, you can't find the right fit unless you move out of the situations that are the wrong fit. Right. So too often we're busy trying to, sure, Dave, okay, I'll try to build on my strengths, but I also want to fix my weaknesses. And it's like, you don't, first of all, who has the time, energy, and resources to do both of those things? And second of all, you're just pulling yourself back and forth instead of letting go of those situations in which you don't fit. Like you said, people, clients, activities, tasks. I mean, even places. I was speaking in Western Australia one time in a really small town south of Perth in Western Australia. I was doing a speaking tour over there back when I was allowed to leave the house. And this guy came up to me afterwards and he goes, Dave, this sounds great. And I'm a freak. And I live in a small town, a rural town in Western Australia. And I'm excited about fashion. And I'm not excited about any of the other things, the farming and the mining and all the things that the people around me do. And I get teased at school and I get in trouble with my parents and I have trouble at school and everybody thinks I'm a big weirdo and you tell me it's okay, but it's not. Nobody wants to be my friend. And I said, where is the center of fashion in, Australia? And he said either Melbourne or Sydney. I don't remember at the time. And I said, that's the solution. The solution isn't how do I get these small town people excited about fashion and my unique perspective on the world. Sure. And in fact, then just like we talked about before, he goes from being a huge weirdo to maybe going to Melbourne and getting involved in the fashion scene and Evan being like, oh, you're actually pretty straightforward. You're pretty vanilla. You're actually, it's not that wild at all. You haven't seen wild yet, right? And then that's how you know you found the right fit, because the other A that we haven't talked about yet is amplification. When you find the right fit and you let go of the things that aren't the right fit, now people actually might ask, or not just ask, but demand from you that you give them more, right? Like 6'6" isn't tall enough when it gets to the NBA, right? So this guy might not be weird enough when it comes to competing with all the other people and all the other ideas and all the other perspectives on a huge national fashion scene, right? But
Right.
compared to the 400 people in his town, he was super weird. I mean, one of the things I do is I wear a lot of pink. I have pink headphones and glasses and pants and all sorts of things. And sometimes people are like, wow, that's really weird. And I'm like, it is in some contexts. You know, when I'm doing a speech in Fargo, North Dakota in the middle of the winter and I'm pumping gas in my pink pants and my pink high tops, that's weird. Nobody else around there is doing that.
Right.
But when I'm walking down the strip in Vegas in my pink pants and my pink shoes, nobody even notices me. In fact, it is pretty, you know, just normal. It's like, well, you know, at least he's wearing pants. You know, it's not that unusual. And
Right.
so the very same behavior in two different situations is perceived very, very differently. And so that's a really crucial part of it. Is sometimes we're like, well, something's wrong with me, or I need those people to change in order for me to be accepted. And it's like, no, you need to find the place. And sometimes that's an actual physical place.
Yeah.
Weird in New York City isn't the same as weird in Topeka, Kansas. It's just not, right?
Yeah.
It's just not.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about the amplification, because that was the next question that I had. So he goes from, you know, south of Perth over to Melbourne into this capital, and now he's the minnow in the big pond. How does he start amplifying?
Well, first of all, sometimes it's going to happen through those relationships, right? You're going to meet other people who are not trying to push you down anymore. They're like, and then what? And what if we also did this? And people who encourage and appreciate you, or just an environment, again, where it's useful. I read this book once called The Tall Book, and it was by this lady who was always really tall growing up and ended up being 6'3" and loved to read, but couldn't find any books on being tall. Okay. So she wrote her own. And one of the things she said is when she started swimming, it was the first time she felt good about being tall, because when she was in the pool, there was a purpose for her height, right?
Yeah,
there was a purpose for her height. So when this guy goes from an environment that's constantly telling him, why can't you just be like the other kids? Why can't you just get into farming? Why can't you focus on your studies? Why do you have to care about what you wear? Why do you always want to go shopping up in Perth? This stuff is stupid and peripheral and unnecessary and a waste of time, to an environment where, for example, he's at a school where a teacher's going, what's your next idea for this outfit? What's your idea for the color scheme in this particular situation? So putting yourself in a school or getting a job where now it's your job to do fashion, that's just going to cause that natural amplification. And when you get rid of that force pushing you back, and you, even if there's just no force pushing you anywhere, it at least allows you to pursue that. Because I don't think amplification assumes there's already something there. And so if you can get away from those forces that are pushing it down, oftentimes you'll just amplify on your own when you stop apologizing and stop trying to fix it. But you can also seek out people who are, what I say is weird like you. Sure. And now you have people kind of like, is that all you got? I got to interview David Spade virtually on Zoom for this nationwide event recently. It was one of his first times doing something like that. And he was like the funniest guy in Scottsdale, Arizona, you know, around Arizona State University. And he's killing it. Right. And then he gets asked to be on Saturday Night Live, and he shows up at Saturday Night Live with Chris Rock, with Chris Farley, with Adam Sandler. And he's like, oh, so I'm a moron who isn't funny at all. Right. I'm a person who's never said anything humorous and doesn't know how to tell a good joke. Being around those people, and in being in an environment, Saturday Night Live, where it's a constant, what do you have? What do you have next? Right. What do you have? What are you working on? Is that all you have? And what he said was, it was like the 7th iteration of an idea he had was finally the one that was funny. Whereas before, he would just roll out that first one, and in Scottsdale, it's like, yeah, that's good enough for us. But when he'd roll out that first one to Chris Farley, he'd be like, and then what if and then they share it with Adam Sandler, and he's like, but if, you know, and then he realized there was always farther to go. But that doesn't happen when you're around people that say, why don't you stop goofing around? Life isn't a joke. It's not all about being funny. You know, nobody cares about your comedy. When you're in that kind of environment, you can't possibly amplify that. And again, I think that's one of the interesting things. You can move, environments can be so powerful that you move from one that's constantly telling you stop being yourself to one that's like telling you you're too much, to one that might tell you, I don't know if you're enough. You know, I don't. Everybody's been telling you your whole life you're so out of control and you have too much of this quality, or you do this thing too much. But then when you hang out with a bunch of people who do it full time, who do it for a living, who've gone pro.
Yep.
And so I think that causes amplification as well, because now you're in an environment that just demands it, basically.
Correct.
And it's really an opportunity to see it being done at a different level. Whereas before, everybody's like, you're too far past any reasonable level. And then you find out there's multiple levels you'd never even heard of.
Well, and I think we've all experienced that. You move into that environment where you are around more like people. And generally speaking, especially your first time there, you do realize, whoa, I'm way down compared to where I thought I was. But it's such a growth environment because you can learn so much. I want to take it back just a step, though, in I guess, self-evaluating. Is there a recommendation you have to kind of assess, hey, what is my weirdness? What is my weakness? So that once I identify that, now I can take action to move forward.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I do it the way I do it, is that weaknesses could be strengths, because most of society is really good at telling us our weaknesses and not as good at telling our strengths, right? People are really happy to say, you know what your problem is, you know what you could be better at, you know what's bothering me about you right now. We get that kind of feedback on a daily basis, right? Even from other drivers, right? From people in stores and restaurants, right? Go out without a mask right now and someone's going to give you some feedback on what kind of person you are, right? So we hear those negatives far more often. And if we can reframe that, and we also do that to other people, if we can reframe that, we can see the strength. And so what I designed was, because that was the biggest question people had for me, I'd do the speech on the freak factor and explain the idea. And the most common question afterwards was, what's good about this bad thing about me? Like, I like it, but in my particular situation, what's the upside to my downside, right? What's the strength to my particular weakness? So what I designed was, and it's right on my website, drendall.com. It's in the book, the Freak Factor book. And we're actually working on turning it into software right now, where you can take it online, get a report, and that's in the early stages right now. But right now it's just a 3-page PDF. The first page you pick from a list of 52 strengths. You pick your top 5. Second page, 52 weaknesses. You pick your top 5, rank them 1 to 5. And then you go to the last page, and you see them right next to each other. So the easiest one to understand is you're on page 1, you're looking for strengths, you're like persistent. Oh yeah, I'm super persistent. I really stick with stuff. You know, I don't let things get me down. I push through even when there's obstacles. Yeah, I'm persistent, right? That's one of my defining characteristics. But you go to page 2, you're looking at the weaknesses and you see stubborn, and you're like, oh my gosh, am I stubborn? Everybody, my mom told me I was stubborn, and my wife tells me I'm stubborn, and my kids tell me I'm stubborn, and my boss tells me I'm stubborn, right? Like, and then you go to page 3 and you're like, of course, persistence is sticking with things longer than most people think is reasonable.
Right.
Stubbornness is sticking with things longer than most people think is reasonable. I'm persistent. I'm stubborn. Those are two sides of the same coin. And there's no way in 2021 for me to be more persistent and less stubborn at the same time. If I'm going to get better, if I'm going to build on that strength, I'm going to have to be unapologetic about the fact that some people are going to call it stubbornness. Some people are going to see it as a negative because I'm sticking with it longer than they think is reasonable, but that's when I win. I win when the competition starts to drop away, and I'm one of the few people that will keep going with something that everyone else has given up on. I mean, we admire Thomas Edison for 10,000 tries, and then he found the light bulb. But when you're on try 9,452, and forget that, when you're on try 942, most of the world has told you you're a moron, it's time to give up, you're an idiot who needs to learn to pivot and let things go and be more flexible. And if you don't have the courage to fight through that, you never have that 10,000th try moment. Because what I tell people is we only appreciate persistence in reverse. When it's happening, we call it stubbornness. When you win, they call it persistence.
Right.
And so that's a tough space between when everyone sees it as stubbornness, and so then maybe you do too.
Sure.
Because you're trying to be a reasonable person who's open to feedback from potentially other people who can help you. And then you miss out on a chance. And so that's the amplification. Nope, everybody's telling me to stop, but I win when I keep going. And sometimes I'm going to lose when I keep going. But that's my system. My system is I always go farther. I have to push those limits. I have to find out.
Okay, well, so one of these negative forces that we're talking about is negative bias, right? That it's all around us. And I'm like as guilty of it as anybody kind of thing, right? What's the best way do you think? Because, well, I guess it's a two-parter because I have this in me, right? Because I think it's just a part of all of us to some degree, some more than others. It's more easy for me to accept this negative bias that people have and give up on my persistence. But what is the way that I can just reduce my negative bias as I look outward?
Yeah, I mean, it's not so much reducing it because we can't really fix it. I mean, the thing about negativity bias is it's a fundamental part of human nature. I mean, it's just part of who we are. Our brain has to work that way. So for those who don't know what negativity bias is, it just means that we see what's wrong instead of what's right in any situation. It means that if my bobblehead here was broken and the arm was missing and kind of hanging down like this, there'd be people watching this who were just like, what's going on? Why does he have a broken bobblehead? They wouldn't be able to focus on anything we were doing, right? If this T-Rex had, or if there was just a big goopy, white goo hanging off there or something like that, or if I mean, there's people who, when John Krasinski did his Some Good News thing that just went totally viral during the pandemic, that they said the world that he spun at the beginning of the show was spinning in the wrong direction. That's negativity bias. Like, this guy's like, I'm going to share with you some good news. And they're like, you're a moron. You don't even know which way the world spins. And they're so like obsessed with it that they can't like focus on anything because they're busy like trying to find him on Twitter to alert him to the fact that the world's spinning the wrong way. When maybe even you could argue that's the point, right? Like, yeah, the world is spinning the wrong way right now. That's why I'm trying to do this show. So, but here's the other side of that. So we think, oh, so, your kid brings home a report card with all good grades and one bad grade, and negativity bias says you're going to see that. You're going to go, oh, man, my kid's struggling. No, your kid has all good grades except for one thing, right? But we're going to focus on that. When you got a stain on your shirt or someone else does, you're going to see that, and you're going to think, what's wrong with that person? Why can't they take care of themselves? But the other side of that is, I do a lot of trail running when I used to be able to leave the house, when I travel. And but even where I run now, there's snakes, right? And if you're running on a trail and you see a poisonous snake, you need your brain to tell you there is a snake on the trail. There is something bad. There is something negative in this situation. There's a massive wide open space of safety, but there is this little piece of danger. Right. You don't need your brain to go, 98% of the trail is snake free. It's fine.
Right.
And so, if you're swimming in the water and you see a shark, you don't go, 98% of the ocean's basically shark free, right? So we don't cure it. We don't fix it. We just need to be aware of it. We just need to know that we tend to. So I do an activity with people during my keynote, and I tell them a series of negative stories about one of my daughters. And then I ask them, what's the strength? So it's okay to notice the weakness. One of the things I try to train people to do is go, well, if every weakness has a corresponding strength, that when you use your negativity bias and you naturally see those negatives, a good question is just, I wonder what the upside is. Right. My spouse, my partner is bothering me with this characteristic. I wonder what the upside is. My kid is bothering me with this characteristic. I wonder what the upside is. And if you can't figure it out, you can go back to the assessment and just go straight to the last page, find the weakness, and look across at the strength. My kid can't focus, but that's because they're curious and they love to explore. My kid's hyperactive. That's because they have a lot of energy. My kid is stubborn. Well, that's going to be great when they grow up. Right. They'll be persistent. I just have to be willing to deal with it now instead of thinking of it as my job to break them of that particular characteristic.
I love it. It's a great way to look at it, because again, the snake is dangerous, but you need to recognize that. But to your point, these attributes have positives, and you need to be able to evaluate, take time, and then frame it in a different perspective. Go ahead.
Yeah, the key is it's with any bias, it's to know it's there. The bias actually doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means we tend to see things in a certain way. So then that's unconscious to some extent. It's instinctive. So we just have to be able to have the wherewithal to go, yeah, that is true. My kid is struggling in that one class, but let's put it in perspective, right? So zoom out. Let's look at the whole picture, right?
Sure.
And so that's one of the skills that I try to teach people is yeah, that is bothering you what your spouse is doing or what that coworker is doing. But the mistake that we make is when we follow up and go, and that's all that's happening. And we get so focused on that, we miss everything good that's going on around the edges. And we miss the fact that the majority of what's going on in most situations is fantastic.
Sure.
And we get so sucked into that one negative that we can't see and notice anything else. And that's when it becomes destructive, when we confuse our ability to see negatives with the idea that everything is negative and reality is made up of exclusively negatives.
Okay. So we're a marketing agency. We help people generate, new clients. I was just curious from your standpoint. I know your history. You were in education before. You've shifted careers, and I love that story in itself. But I'm just curious from a marketing standpoint. When you're starting out, what was your experience? How did you go from, zero to being here today, to talking to David Spade, to traveling the world, right?
Yeah. It's a good question. I don't know that I have a great answer from a marketing at least the way people traditionally think about marketing.
But that's why I wanted to ask you, right?
Yeah. So I think the answer is sometimes unsatisfying to people, but it's also true. So as you said, I used to be a college professor. I started the business kind of at the same time. And literally everything I've ever done has been based on word of mouth. I did a talk and somebody told somebody who told somebody. The David Spade thing, it's a great example. So that was for a group called Entrepreneurs Organization. They have chapters all over the world. And it's a Portland story. In 2011, I did a free talk to help a friend out when I was attending a conference. So she knew I was coming. She's like, hey, Dave, I got this breakfast group, networking group. We meet. I can't pay you. Maybe some people will buy a book off of you. Right. I stood at the head of the table, like in one of those like tents off the edge of a restaurant where they try to create a little extra space by throwing up some plastic. We weren't even the only ones in the room. It wasn't like we even had a dedicated room. There was like a group of people at a table behind us as I'm standing up giving this presentation. We were right next to the dumpsters, and a garbage truck rolled up in the middle, just boop, 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 and then and then bam, bam, just the whole thing, right? So, and this is part of the story. Like, be helpful, be kind, be generous. But I didn't even really have a business at that time, or I wasn't doing that. I wasn't thinking like, this is a great marketing opportunity. I was just trying to be a decent person, right? So I do that talk, and this guy sends me an email from Portland, and he says, hey, Dave, I'm part of this group called Entrepreneurs Organization. We have chapters all over the world. One of our members saw you at that thing, and he thought you were fantastic. In fact, better than most of the speakers we get. He told me, I'm in charge of our events. Do you want to come to Portland and speak? I was like, sure. So now I know about Entrepreneurs Organization. So I'm going to Australia. And I asked one of my friends if she's heard of, if she knows if they have a chapter there. And she's like, I'm actually in the chapter. Do you want to speak to our group when you come to Australia? So I actually spoke in Australia before the first one in Portland. I did the one in Portland. They said, hey, we have this regional event called Alchemy. Can you come speak at that? Yeah. I did. They said, hey, we have this Global Student Entrepreneur Awards in DC. Can you come speak at that? I did that. And then I started getting requests from chapters, all over the country, all over the world. And so here we are 8 years later in the middle of a global pandemic, and I'm talking to people in Oman. I'm talking to people in Malaysia about speaking at their events. I just spoke for a guy in South Africa, and they're asking me, hey, can you host this national thing we're doing with David Spade? The next week I got to interview Dan Pink, and he's like one of my heroes. In the speaking and writing business. And so all of that, and I've toured India, the Middle East. Last year I was in London, Paris, Egypt, Dublin, and Jordan in a 2-week period, all for that one group, right? And it's still 8 years later. And so that's the program. That's I spoke for this local apartment group. And I did like 7 or 8 of those for these little groups all over the country. And then last year I spoke at the National Apartment Association, and that led to invitations, all over the country. Sure. And so I think behind that is I use a ton of humor in my presentations. I'm 6'6". I wear pink pants. I wear pink shoes. I wear pink glasses. I have pink tattoos, but I didn't at the beginning. I didn't when this started. Right. But I'm memorable because it's funny. I'm memorable because it's unique. Nobody goes, oh yeah, don't work on your weaknesses. Only build on your strengths. Be weird. your weaknesses are your best qualities. Flaunt them, embrace them. They're like, oh, every day I hear that at work, or, oh, I'm so tired of that message. It's surprising. It's unusual. I tell people stories about autistic software testers, about a guy with no arms who holds the world record for the longest, most accurate shot in archery, dyslexic billionaires. I tell stories about how I don't fit in airplane bathrooms and how my left arm doesn't work at the drive-thru because I broke it when I was a kid. And so there's no point during the talk where people are like, yeah, great, whatever. Here we go again with the bullet points. Right. It's surprising. It's unusual. It's thought-provoking. It's unconventional. It's attention-grabbing. And also, I have a passion for it. People can tell, even if they're not excited about it, when you're excited, at some point it becomes contagious. You're not going to get everybody. But At some point, the people in the audience are like, wow. Yeah, I mean, even just the other day, I was doing a virtual thing, and it was just for 15 minutes. And again, to help these people out, it wasn't a paid thing. And the lady goes, geez, you've got a lot of energy for a virtual thing. I've never felt this way, on Zoom, Yeah. And so when you have that passion, people feel it, and then they start to be like, if it's that important to him, maybe it should be important to me, right? And so it's somewhat contagious. So I think all of this stuff that's ever happened to the growth of my business has been really mostly about the idea. I think I happened to personally stumble across something. It wasn't a genius marketing move. I wasn't like, what people want to learn about, right? I was like, I realized one day my weaknesses were strengths. It transformed my life when I started flaunting them instead of trying to fix them. Right. I have a great life even in the middle of a global pandemic where my business has been completely devastated. I still have a great life, and I've still had, even if it all ends right now, I've had a great life, and I've had a great career, and I've been able to do things that would be on most people's bucket list because I'm doing the kind of stuff that I teach. And so that passion really comes across, and I want to share. So I think it's a lot about the idea. The next one is it's about the authenticity of I truly believe in the idea. I'm not just selling something. I'm sharing my story, but I also genuinely care about making a difference. So I wrote a kid's book because so many people would ask me about their kids, with disabilities or kids with learning challenges or kids who were being bullied. So I turned it into a kid's book, again, not because I'm a genius marketer, but because even when I was speaking to executives, they're like, do you have anything for kids? And so now, the entrepreneurs ask me mostly to speak to them and their spouses and to their kids. They're like, don't even talk about business. Everybody's got a business book. Everybody's trying to tell us how to improve our ROI and our profitability, whatever. So I've started, normally if we weren't in the middle of a global pandemic, I'd be about to start speaking at last year in August, in a 5-day span, I spoke at 7 schools, to teachers and to kids as the school year. So it's opened up a whole new thing. And so part of the marketing has been, I haven't really identified an audience and a target market and all those kinds of things. Those people have kind of identified themselves. Even I did a marketing talk one time where I stripped out all the relationship stuff and all that. I only used business examples, and it was my first time doing it. And we turned that into a book actually now, and we call it Pink Goldfish. But at the time, it was just an idea. Okay. And lady raises her hand. It was the American Marketing Association in Richmond, Virginia. Lady raises her hand during the Q&A. She goes, this applies to parenting too, though, right? I was talking about IKEA, and I was talking about Google, and I was talking about Hardee's, and I was talking about, right? And in her mind, she's going, but people, right? This works with people, right? So people see the applications, and then they, so when I updated the book recently, it started as a career book. The Freak Factor started as a career, here's how you can align. Here's how you can avoid. Here's how you can amplify. Here's how you can have a better life. But I updated it with chapters on marriage and parenting and entrepreneurship and business strategy. And then we stripped that one out and created a whole book, Pink Goldfish, about marketing. And that's something that I'm really excited about as well. And so I think that's part of my strategy is to, to flaunt those weaknesses, I make a joke. A lot of my humor is self-deprecating humor, and not that I don't respect or value myself, but I don't take myself too seriously. And so I'm 6'6". but I do long distance endurance racing and things like that. And you may not be able to kind of see from the camera, but I'm a skinny person, right? I'm 6'6". I weigh 180 pounds right now. And so I tell people I have the body of a JV girls basketball player, right? So most people wouldn't do that, right? They'd say, no, I need to be professional. The biggest message you get from you call this thing ask an expert. So somebody feels like, all right, so what I do is I say, I'm successful.
Yeah.
Here's how I've become successful. If you want to be successful, be like me. So you would never say I'm unsuccessful, or I failed, or I'm stupid, or I'm weird, or I'm broken, or I'm damaged, or I'm,
Sure.
And yet that's even why my tattoos are on my left arm. I'm drawing attention to something that's broken and damaged in two different ways. And I share that story every time in my talk, whereas most people wouldn't try to put the spotlight on something that was wrong with them.
Right.
And so I use what I talk about every single day in my life, and I practice it with my kids. I practice it with my wife. I practice it in my business. I practice it in everything that I do. And I think people feel that in a way that there's no way to kind of quantify.
Yeah, you said a word that really resonates with me. It's one I've been thinking about these past several months, and it's authenticity. And what I love about it, and especially the tattoo, and I've heard the story, it's the fact that this is who I am. Right? Like, I'm not trying to cover up a part of me because I'm not trying to change. Like, guess what, folks? And what's interesting to me and everybody, well, I shouldn't say everybody, but a lot of people have experienced this in the past 3 months where I can't see you in person. So suddenly I have to sit in front of this monitor. And a lot of people at the beginning were like, I don't like how I sound, and I don't like how I look, and I can't see my face. And it's like, guess what, folks? Like, that's you. That's what everybody's seen your whole life.
That's what everybody's been seeing. You're not seeing. You're seeing them, but that's what everybody's been looking at. Yeah.
Right. And you have great friends and you have great relationships. Yeah. So don't be afraid of what you are, because that's what's got you to where you are today.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's exactly right. And I think that's the process. We talked about some of the action steps, but the beginning of the freak factor is changing the way you see yourself and change other people. And so you asked about assessment. So it starts with assessment, but then it's acceptance, accepting who you are, but then not just accepting it like, oh yeah, I'm a little tall, and oh yeah, my nose is big, or whatever it happens to be that you don't like about you. My eyebrows are so bushy, or my hair's gray, or I'm losing my hair, or whatever it happens to be. It's not just accepting it. It's then going a step further and appreciating it, seeing the value in it. Let's talk gray hair for a second. I heard a great line one time. I was at this business seminar years ago, and this lady, she was probably in her mid-50s, and she had kind of short, spiky gray hair. And her son was trying to help her out with her new consulting business. He's like, Mom, you got to dye your hair. You got to look better, right? Better.
Yeah.
Right? You got to look younger. Better means younger, especially for women in our society. And she said, I love what she said back to him, because this is flaunting, right? She refused to, instead of going, oh, you're right, I am getting older and I probably should get some Botox and get my hair done, and that's the only way to be better.
Yeah.
Right? I love it. This is the essence of flaunting and being unapologetic. Not only am I not going to do that, I'm going to push it even farther than you can imagine. And she told him, I'm selling gray hair. Right? I'm selling the fact that I am 55. I'm selling the fact that since I was 22, I've been in business. I've got 33 years in this. I'm selling the fact that I'm older than you. I'm selling the fact that I've been in it since the 80s. I'm selling the fact that, right?
Yeah.
So she was confident in who she was. And when you're like that, people feel it. Because think about it, like, let's say my pink pants or my pink shoes. If someone goes, hey man, I like your pink pants, and instead of going, yeah, cool, and I talk to them and it's a conversation starter, I go, yeah, what can you do? Laundry day, but I guess, it kills it, right? It kills it immediately.
Right.
If you're not proud of it, if you don't believe in it, people tell me all the time, some guy will come up to me and go, oh man, I love those pink pants. I don't think I could pull that off though. And I'm like, look, it's a 2-step process. Step 1, get yourself some pink pants. Step 2, put them on. And if you did that and you walked out in public, someone would come up to you just like you came up to me, and they'd say, hey man, I love your pink pants, but I don't think I could pull that off. I tell people you're pulling it off when you pull them on, but it's about the attitude that you have with it. if as soon as somebody sees it, you start to be shrinking away, if the whole time you're trying to kind of hide the fact that you have the pink pants, if you don't have to be strutting like you're going down the runway,
Sure.
but if it's, and that's the other thing too, it's not fake. I didn't put on pink pants like a costume. I have daughters. I have 3 daughters. I live with all women. I tell jokes about how they're turning me into a woman. They're not entirely jokes because they're mostly true, right? And so pink is part of my life. Pink is part of my world. Girls, feminine things are part of my life and my world. And so I'm not ashamed of that. And I decided to flaunt that. I decided to promote that. I decided to highlight that. It wasn't like, again, that I did this research study and decided that pink was going to be the thing for my brand. And so I think that's part of the authenticity. It's not about saying, what should I do to get people's attention?
Right.
Because if that's just hollow and there's nothing behind it, then it doesn't work.
Sure.
Or if it does work, it breaks down when you have to figure out, well, what's the next thing? What's the next part?
Right.
But this has been a natural evolution with me, and then it becomes other people start to propel it. Other people's other people start to create it. So I've got people sending me pictures of pink stuff from all over the world. Like, hey, check out this guy in Pakistan. He's wearing this full-on pink outfit. Oh, look, I'm driving in Dubai. I mean, it's unsafe. People are like, I'm driving in Dubai right now, and I'm took this picture of this cool pink car. So it becomes this relationship building thing. And if all I was doing was trying to get people's attention with it, then what do I want a picture of a pink car? But instead I'm like, oh, that's cool. And then I post it on Instagram where I only post pictures of pink things. And I never post a picture of anything that isn't pink because it's fundamentally a part of who I am. And it's fun for me. And it's become part of my identity. Sure. It's not a marketing activity. It's not a strategy.
Well, so this reminds me, we had Robert Glazer on, and he's got an email that he sends out, and it started like over 6 years ago, just to his staff, and now he has over 200,000 people on his email list. And he talked about how he just stayed in his lane. He found something that was interesting to him. He put his point of view on it. And for years and years, it just went to his staff. And slowly over time, it started resonating. It started building. Yeah. And he does it still today. And he's got 200,000 people, but he does it by staying true to who he is. So I love, right, because I do think people can see the pink and they can be like, oh, he just picked the brightest color, in the Crayola box. But it's got it's got an authentic, tie to your family. It actually reminds me, as much as your girls are bringing you into their world. I heard you give a speech about how you're bringing the girls into your world. I'll save that. We'll tease that for another one. But it's a great anecdote. I want to shift it a little bit and stay with what you were just talking about in large part, which is you have traveled the world being on stage, right? You have a great career, and I think it's a fascinating one. And I do want to...
I had a great career.
Well, so that's where we're going. And I want to give you kudos because I do think that you're very charismatic. You have this, you fit this sweet spot between humor, which is challenging to a lot of people. So that's an art in itself, but with really great insights, which is why I struggled as prepping. People don't know this, but before we got on here, I told you were one of the hardest ones for me to kind of prep for because you just got a very interesting take. Speaking, 18 months, 24 months, 12 months, whatever it is, everything is just kind of on pause. And so we're already hearing about, things are going virtual, things are going this way. What do you see as kind of this? And I haven't traveled the world. I've traveled the country quite a bit, been to a lot of events, but that's not happening anymore. What do you see as happening from an event standpoint? What are you seeing personally, and where do you think it should go into the future?
Well, I think where it should go in the future is back to mostly the way it was. The most valuable thing that people always say they get from any conference or any meeting of any kind, no matter what its purpose is the relationships that they built with the people that were there.
Right.
The hallway conversations, the person they never would have met, but they bumped into them in the line at the buffet or whatever it happens to be. So regardless of the explicit purpose of a conference, and that was my world, was going to conferences, the feedback consistently from any event planner that you'll talk to is, well, yeah, that speaker was great. And yeah, I got to meet a vendor, whatever, but I met so-and-so, and that's going to change my life or my world in some kind of way. And that doesn't happen as well, or really even at all, in a virtual kind of situation. So I think long-term, and in fact, I think what's happening right now is you're going to get a huge pent-up demand for that, just like you're seeing people go crazy this summer, like traveling as soon as they were allowed to, which is one of the reasons we're struggling again, because as soon as they were like, well, we're going to release some of the restrictions, they're like, it's over, let's go, And so people had this, you lock people down in their homes for 2 months, they don't learn to love their homes more, maybe, but they learn that they really love going out, and they have this massive desire to do it even more. Look at how many people started walking their neighborhoods who never did before as soon as they were on lockdown. It's like you could have been walking every night previously, but you didn't feel that restriction. So I think people have this. I mean, the airlines just have to make it to that point, but people want to fly somewhere. People want to go to Europe. People want to travel. They want to go. People want to go to conferences. They want to meet in person. They have been, and that's part of the reason that we're still struggling with this, is because we weren't able to hold on long enough, maybe at least not here in the United States. I think at the same time, since we have this second wave, so all my stuff's got recanceled. So August, September, October, things are getting canceled again. I thought if I could make it 3 or 4 months, I'd be okay. And now it's all falling apart again. I think a lot of event planners and organizations were just trying to hang on to and then restart doing things normally. So I think what's going to happen is people are going to get better at virtual because they're going to embrace it. They're going to stop seeing it as less than. They're going to stop seeing it as a poor substitute. They're going to see all of the advantages. So I'll give you one that I'm doing next week, which won't make sense in a second because I'm doing it next week, but I already did it. And so the cool thing they're doing, which I think is actually better than a real speech in one particular way, is they already recorded my speech. And then while they play it during their event, I'll be there on the Zoom call with everybody else, and they can ask me questions nonstop as I'm talking, because I'm not talking. I'm just sitting behind my computer watching myself do my talk. So instead of this choppy Q&A, where you're trying to, at the end, look through the chat and see, who's just saying hi to their friend and who has a question for you and all this kind of stuff, or trying to manage polls, or just trying to be a producer while you're also trying to give a presentation. It came up with an idea. So I think there's going to be more of that, where people are like, look at the cool things we can do. Look at what we can spend money on when we're not spending money on putting everyone in a hotel. Look at what we could spend money on when we're not spending money on flying the speaker. I've started going to a local studio and got cameras and a full lighting setup, and I got people on the AV. And so I'm hiring my own team when somebody wants to hire me at that level to give it a better visual. And so I think people are upgrading their home studios. So I think people are going to get better at. Zoom is getting pushed to improve their tools. Microsoft Teams is getting pushed to improve their tools. GoToMeeting is getting pushed to improve their tools. When people start using it on a mass scale, there's more people going, this is bullcrap, and this is stupid, and this doesn't work. And so I think you're going to have more people, instead of like trying to do their own virtual event, they're going to realize, I need to hire somebody who knows what they're doing. And you're going to have more companies who do that. You're going to have companies who go, you tell us what you want to do, and we're going to, not like a terrible reproduction. Like I've done some online teaching when I was in education, and I've taken online classes. And what I expected was, oh, okay, I'll be sitting at home on my computer and watching somebody lecture to me. No, that never happened at all. They're like, in an online environment, we're not going to just reproduce. We're going to do things differently. There was way more discussion, way more interaction, way more assignments, way more learning of a different kind. There was none. There was literally zero of you
just sitting.
They're like, you can read that in a book. What do you need? Why is the professor talking to you about something you were already supposed to read in the book? Read this book, write a paper about this book, have this discussion with your fellow classmates and with your professor about that book. Now we're getting somewhere. And so I think somebody made a great point that when you do online shopping, they had a little video. You don't show up like in a video game. moving through a real store, looking at the aisles and using your avatar to grab things and put them in a basket and then carry them to the checkout and go face to face with this other computer generated person who checks you out and puts them in a bag and puts it in your fake card and sends you home, right?
Right.
And that we would think that was outrageous. And yet that's kind of what virtual events are right now. They're like, okay, for 3 days, you're going to sit staring at your computer. I did one recently where they had literally had 2 MCs sitting in a room just all by themselves. All right, well, we're back. And so I think it's going to turn into TV. You're going to have producers. You're going to have special effects. You're going to have just a higher production level, I think, is where we're going.
Right.
Because people are going to realize there's only so long we can go with no training. There's only so long we can go with no meetings.
Right.
Our vendors actually are willing to pay for the way that we're promoting them online versus just throwing up a slide with 14 different vendors and going, yeah, thanks to our sponsors. They weren't getting a lot of value out of that anyway.
Right.
What's a better way to engage them? So I think there's opportunities to do things better. And that might seem to contradict what I said earlier, but it doesn't. I think there's also just a value in real life events that will always be there.
Right.
But I think people will see, I mean, even you're starting to see a reaction against it already. People are like, every call doesn't have to be a Zoom call, pick up the phone. When pick up the phone is the personal approach, right?
Right.
That used to be the thing you were supposed to do. You're supposed to go meet with the person. And they're like, look, people have seen your face enough. It's fine. Let the person, stare out the window at the squirrels that are playing in the forest. Stop forcing people to look at you the whole time. Let somebody do some push-ups while they're on a talk with you,
Right. Well, so 2 parts to this. One is I love the conference that you're going to next week. I have a friend who I met at a conference who is now a good friend. So I 100% appreciate the relationships that you develop. I have great longstanding clients, great friends that have developed over the years, and those wouldn't have happened unless I was at an event. And those are really the meaty things that come out of it. But we were talking, he is now a speaker, and we were talking about how do you make, the speaking environment while it's virtual more dynamic. And I love that approach, which is, hey, you pre-record it, but you're able to be there in real time so that people can interact with you, because that's something that when you're given a keynote, they can't do. Right? I mean, that's just, it's not possible. And
you can do things. So like I said, I do that one where I tell them about my daughter's weaknesses and I ask them for the strengths. In a real environment, say 100, 200 people, not in thousands and thousands of people, but in 100, 200 people, I have some people raise their hand and shout out, she's creative, she's persistent, she's whatever. And then I'll repeat that back to the crowd. We have a little interaction and it shows that people are getting it, right? And I use that as an illustration.
Right.
But that's just a couple of people. I did one the other day and there was, 70 people on the call or whatever. And I'm like, look, as you listen, type in the chat any strengths you hear. And so some people are typing in 7. Okay. And at least almost everybody typed in 1. And so people are watching and they're proving my point for me. I don't have to go. So as you can see, her weakness is a strength, and I'm going to tell you how. Yeah. They're seeing this massive change in the people around them and in themselves, and they're seeing people say the same things and confirm the same perspective. And they're seeing how quickly it happened and how easy it was to change that perspective. Whereas it seemed like a really crazy thing. Your weaknesses are strengths. I know people are going, I'm not so sure about that. And then I tell this story and then everybody, so to have 80 people, 90 people, if you had 1,000 people, you could have 1,000 people in the chat, because it doesn't really matter what they're saying. It matters that people see that people are saying something. Right. And that's almost more interesting. Holy cow. There's an overwhelming number of people who are seeing the strength hiding inside of the weakness right now in this moment. There's value in this. This is real. I can believe this. Right. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there to do things better, to not just go, well, I mean, it's not as good as being there in person, because to some extent, that's not true. For me, I think conferences need to be together. Yeah. But I don't think they need me there. I think I can get on a virtual stage and I can get in the studio. And I mean, people are inspired by TED Talks all the time and they're not there.
Right.
They weren't at the thing.
Yeah.
And so I don't think we need the speakers to be there. In fact, that's another interesting one that may not happen anymore this particular way, but they're like, look, we went virtual. And then I'm like, okay. And then they're like, but we'd like a few of the things to be done in like our studio at our location. The people will be virtual, but a certain number of the presentations will be coming from the same spot, kind of like you're doing like a telethon, and it's like, oh, okay, now, so-and-so's going to come up and sing their song, and then we're going to, and so that's even another mix. Look, the speakers and the people and the presentations and the entertainment, they are going to be at one central location where you can have the production crew, you can have the studio, you can have the lighting, you can have the AV, but the crowd's going to be dispersed.
Sure.
And so, and then that changes the perspective too, because I did one the other day where it was a company where they haven't shut down. They make portable sinks, which have been even more valuable during this whole pandemic, people washing their hands.
Yeah.
And so I got on and I was expecting to see a bunch of little boxes. Instead, it was just one box and it was 20 people sitting in a room looking at me. And so I'm like, I could tell my jokes because I'll know if they're laughing. I can see them smiling. I can see people raise their hands. And so it was the best experience that I've had during this entire pandemic because they were together. And even though I couldn't be there, the fact that they were together and I could look at all of them as a group. Yeah. And so I think that's an opportunity as well. When there's a company and there's people that are working together and things like that, you have 3 or 4 locations or 3 or 4 groups of people who, have worked together long enough that they know they're not transmitting disease or whatever back and forth, or they have to work together anyway. So that having them sit in a room for training is not a big deal.
Yep.
From a speaker standpoint, that was like a breakthrough. I'm like, oh my gosh, I saw someone smile. I saw someone laugh at one of my jokes. I could ask people a question and hear them say something back to me. I could just see the audience. I mean, just even being able to see the people in general was a huge breakthrough. So I think there's so many different ways to do it that we haven't explored yet. And there's so many ways to do it better. We've got a lot of learning to do.
Well, I'm glad to hear about the last one because I've spoken a few times, so by no means am I a speaker. But I can't do a good job unless I have that audience feedback, right? I mean, it's like I feel like I'm kind of like I guess you'd call me the poker player speaker, right? Which is like I got to look for the tells in the audience to see if I'm going down the right direction. Yeah. So I'm glad to hear that format is becoming more available because I was literally going to ask you, how do you speak into a camera and give your keynote, which has humor, when you don't have audience laughter coming back at you?
A lot of the humor I take out, to be honest with you, and I focus on the concept. I think you can still do it the same way. I think you just, I mean, you even see it here. I don't have an audience. We're just talking, but you've seen me get very animated. You've seen my voice go, and my energy level and me waving my hands. So I think some of it some of that's motor memory from what I used to, it's like all of a sudden it's just like a switch flips and it's like, oh, I'm doing my thing again. But part of it is, it can be something you teach yourself. Like they ask you all the time, when you do speeches, they're like, hey, can you do a little 1 minute, hey, I'm excited to be in Denver next month. Everybody come on out to the convention center for the apartment, and they want you to do those videos. And so when I was doing those videos, I felt like I was going, come on out to Denver. It's going to be freaking amazing. And it's going to be fantastic. And you've got to join me. And then I'd watch it back and it looks like it would be awesome if you guys maybe came to Denver and it'd be pretty good.
Right.
And I was like, oh, wow. There's a big difference between the way I feel and the way it seems. And I never would have known that if I wasn't, doing this.
Sure.
So I think it is something that you can practice to say, hey, just like if I'm speaking in a room of 2,000 people, I can't do it the same way I would do it for a room of 20 people.
Yeah.
They kind of say you have to speak to the back of the room and your motions get bigger. In the front of a group of 20 people, I might go, the fish was that big. But in front of a group of 2,000 people, you go, oh, the fish was this big, Right. I was so excited versus I was so excited. Like you have to be bigger and do bigger things in those different kinds of situations. So I think the same thing might be true on video, that you have to go, okay, the medium seems to make me feel like a 6 is the right way to go about it, but I've got to find a way to turn it up to like an 8 or an 8.5.
Right. So it's not
because even though I'm not getting that feedback, I just have to, part of it is confidence and part of it is being unapologetic. I mean, I did one the other day. You talk about a lack of feedback. The system they used is one that I've never heard of before, and it was in South Africa. And I didn't even have a box up in the corner where I could even see what they were seeing from me.
Okay.
My screen went full screen with my slides. Even if somebody was in the chat, like, we can't hear you, I wouldn't have been able to see. I couldn't see anything.
Right.
You shared your screen, and when you shared your screen and you did a presentation, it went full screen, just like it does when you're at an event.
Yeah.
And I spent 45 minutes talking to people on the other side of the world, not knowing if my connection was good and all those things. Just looking into my camera, just going nuts,
right.
hoping for the best.
Sure.
But it went really, really well. And I had to act as if.
Yeah. Act the part.
Yeah. And so that's one of the reasons I went to the studio, because I realized that for some things, if someone wants to hire me to do a virtual keynote versus just kind of like a webinar, there's things that I do where I use my whole body.
Okay.
And even in this screen, you can't, once I move my arms, you can't see what I'm doing. Oh, I can't look at my arm. You can't see that. You can see this. You can't see my arm.
Sure.
And so I realized that for me to do my whole thing, there were some things I couldn't do sitting down, but I have dramatically increased my energy level. It used to be that kind of once you sit down, it kind of leaves you to kind of feel like,
right.
Hey man, it's great to kind of, be on the show today. But I sit up and I've learned to just, amp it up a little bit, because it doesn't work. So I think it's just practice, or it's just like deciding, like, I'm going to talk two levels higher than I normally would. And I'm going to move the same way I would, even though, flying hands on Zoom looks weird to them. I'm going to give it 110%,
Okay. So my next question is, when you're not at 110%, when you're not at 100%, what do you personally do for motivation, to get that inspiration, that gets you back on track?
Well, one of the things my dad always taught me was control the things you can control. And I hated that advice, because he was usually telling me I shouldn't yell at the umpire in the baseball game, or I shouldn't be mad at one of my brothers or sisters for being a jerk or something like that. But it really is valuable advice. And so what I've been trying to do, because this has been devastating. I mean, I had 10 highly paid presentations booked just in March, and they just one after the other got canceled. And then some things started to turn around, and we'll get back to that in a second. And then with the COVID cases going up, things that got rescheduled. I had 3 presentations scheduled for the first week of August. Those have all been either canceled or rescheduled for next year now, like next March.
Yeah.
And you can't pay the bills based on next March.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, at least I have that thing in October. Nope. I got that thing in Arizona. They haven't even had COVID. And then they have more COVID cases now than any place ever did. When at the beginning of this, it was like, I don't even think it's in Arizona. Like there was nothing going on in Arizona. And now they're like the epicenter.
Yeah.
I had something else scheduled for Orlando, of all the places, and Florida has become a death zone. And so I went from thinking I got to wait 3 months and ride this out and figuring out how to do that, to thinking I might have to ride this out till next March before I can start really making money again. And so the only way to stay sane is to control the things you can control. Okay. I can do this call with you guys instead of going, no, I'm kind of depressed. My business is all going in the crapper, and, I don't know what this is going to do for me. And, it's not going to pay the bills. So screw that. I'm going to do another call for my college at 7:30 tonight. Because I'm going to do something, right? I can't change coronavirus. I can't heal people. I can't force businesses to hire me or to pay me. And so I'm focusing on the things I can control. And some of that has nothing to do with business. So I had a 100-mile race, a 100-mile running race planned, an ultramarathon planned in the Outer Banks of North Carolina for March. And it got canceled just like everything else did. And so I ran a 5-mile loop in my neighborhood 20 times. And I ran my 100-mile race. I trained for it. I was prepared for it. It was one of my goals. It's been one of my goals for 3 years to do a 100-mile race. And that inspired some of my friends enough that a month later, they ran a 100-mile race with me, same place. And we raised about $5,000 for Make-A-Wish Foundation. And then the next month, I ran 7 marathons in 7 days. And then I was so close to 200 miles that on the last day, I ran an extra 16.6 miles just to round it up to 200. Okay. Because I'm hyperactive, right? And that's a strength now that I use instead of being a weakness. So I can't change the fact that they're canceling races. I can't change the fact that they're canceling my events. I can't force the money to come in, but there are things I can control. I can get on calls. I can respond to emails. I can do free videos. I can be helpful. I can share my information. I've kept my assistant on because if I fired her, she's in the Philippines and she'd have no resources and wouldn't be able to take care of her children. And so we're still putting our stuff out there and we're still working together. So that's what I'm doing. I'm controlling the things I can control, and I'm trying to do the best I can in a bad situation instead of letting the things I can't control overwhelm me and have me go, since so much is out of my control, I might as well give up.
Right.
And so part of it is redirecting it, right? I don't get paid for running races either. But it's a way to inspire people. It's a way to encourage people. It's a way to raise money for good causes when I can't give money to those good causes because I've become a cause in the last 4 months, you know? And so, and I think it also then helps you with your motivation and your confidence because it helps you not feel like a loser or like a failure or like there's something wrong with you because you are taking on challenges, you are achieving goals, you are having successes. So people are talking about, you know, putting on the COVID-15. For me, you know, I'm losing weight because I'm focusing on that because that's the thing I can control. And we're not going out to eat. You don't have the money in because the restaurants were closed for so long.
Sure.
So I'm eating the food. I have more time to cook and I'm grilling a lot and I have more control, especially than when I traveled, of the kinds of things I put in my mouth. And so I'm using this as an opportunity to get in better shape, to take on some physical challenges I haven't done before, to hit some other targets that I haven't done and things like that. And I'm trying to focus on the long term. I mean, I'm working on the online version of the assessment that I think could be a huge breakthrough, but it probably won't make me any money for the next 1.5 years, 2 years. But instead of going, well, it's not going to pay the bills right now, I don't plan on being dead in the next 2 years. So I need to be thinking about that future, even though the present is uncomfortable. That future's coming, whether I'm better off in that future or not. And so it'll be good to have that resource and that asset, you know, in 1.5 years, in 2 years, and maybe even before that. And maybe it'll surprise me, but you can't make money on something that you haven't completed because you were like, the world kind of sucks right now. I'm just going to watch Netflix.
Right. Well, one of my favorite words is perspective, and I think that you have a fantastic perspective. I think that you have been an inspiration because I've seen you speak over the past year, and I just want to thank you for coming on today. It's been really meaningful, and I think from a personal standpoint, I've been able to take away a lot of things and just kind of rethink my personality, my approach, what does make me valuable, and I'm excited to be able to share this with people because I think that there's a lot of things that they can apply internally that will help them professionally, and perhaps more important, help them with their close personal relationships, including their family.
Yeah, so that's one thing maybe to finish with that I just realized is part of what's keeping me motivated too is I can't necessarily always get paid for what I do right now, but I can still be helpful, and that's part of the point as well, right? There's a purpose to what I do when I'm speaking to those students, speaking to those teachers, speaking to those parents. So I did a radio show with a guy from Australia, and he sent me a follow-up email, which doesn't normally happen, like from the host, and he's like, "Hey, Dave, I just want you to know, I was at like a bonfire at a neighbor's house the other day, and one of my other neighbors who's a teacher came up to me and told me that he listened to the episode and that he's already used the information with his students and with some of the parents, and it's been super helpful in the classroom. And I just thought, oh man, that's what it's all about, and I thought you'd want to know."
Right.
And so I posted a little bit of that story on Facebook, and what I said is I can't necessarily make money right now, but I can still make a difference.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good thing too to think about is like, what can I do right now? do I just throw it all away? I wasn't just doing it for the money. I have to make a living, but I'm not
Sure.
just doing it for the money. It's not just valuable because I get paid for it.
Right.
That kid's book changes people's lives. Those teachers change people's lives. Those parents change, those business owners change employees' lives. I had a guy last year saw me speak in New York, and he saw that one of his employees was struggling with her adult son. He was like in his 20s. And he gave her the book that he bought from me, the Freak Factor book. She gave it to the son. The son read it, and she came back to work, and she's like, it's been a total turnaround. He's back to being enthusiastic about things. He's stopped being depressed. I just can't thank you enough. And this guy's, again, thankfully sharing it with me because I already got paid for that event. That's not the purpose. The purpose is, oh, wow, I already got paid for that book. I didn't make more money when that book got passed along, but I made a difference, and that is what things are really about. We have to stay alive, but hopefully we're doing more than just surviving. And so I think that's another thing we can focus on during these difficult times to stay motivated is go, maybe this activity isn't guaranteed to make me any money, but is this a good, valuable thing to be doing? Because right now, at least in my case, I've got more time than I've got of anything else. Whereas normally it's like, oh, I got to be really careful with my time and make sure I'm using it wisely because I have so much to do. Right now it's like, when are you available? Every day. When can you schedule something? Right now. I mean, I think you guys contacted me 2 days ago, and I was like, boom, I'm available on Friday. It could have been some other one farther off, but why? Right? Why not just do it now?
Right. Well, we certainly appreciate your time because that resonates with who I am, part of me. I think an underlying theme throughout most of the interviews has been serving, not selling right now. And because there's people in need. And if you have the know-how, if you have the ability to make a difference in somebody's life, do it because it's going to fill up it's going to fill up a part of you. Ideally, hopefully, at some point it's going to come full circle and fill you up when you're in need.
Well, there's so many people in need right now too. Who are you going to reach out to, right? You're probably trying to get something from or benefit from someone who doesn't have anything either, right? I mean, you're like, oh, why don't you hire me? Why don't you book me? Why don't you pay me? It's like, because we're paying. I mean, I just done a ton of stuff with apartment associations, and now they're not getting paid rents, and now they're, all sorts of things like that. And so I think it is a time. I think that's a great point to serve, not sell. And I think it's always a great time to do that because really that's part of my story. I've been serving the whole time. That's, helping that lady out with that free talk. And it's helped pay my bills for the last 8 years, just indirectly. There was no way to guarantee it though. I've got one question for you. It's been driving me crazy the whole time. Yeah. It's not negativity bias. It's just total curiosity. And you can cut this with the thing if you want. It looks like you have a bunch of air freshener cans behind you on the wall. That's what it looks like to me. And I'm guessing it's not.
It's not. No. So
it is a can stacked on top of another can but then there's the line in the middle.
Yes.
I gotcha.
Yeah. So I'm one of my passions is hiking. And one of my passions is beer. So I have combined them into what I call Go Beer King, which is to take a craft beer out on a hike and enjoy it. So you've got about 100 future hikes here on the wall. That's my passion. That's one of the things that keeps me motivated, when times are difficult like they are right now.
Yeah, I do a lot of ultra running, and the ultra running beer is, I'm not a beer guy, but the ultra running beer is, there's a company called Sufferfest Beer.
Okay.
And so their company is really directed towards the ultra runners of the world, and that's what they sponsor and all those kinds of things.
Sure.
But then I know this other guy, you might want to check him out for an interview. His name is Jason Hargrath, hard, just like you would think, and then RATH. He does all these fastest known time kind of activities.
Okay.
And then he's a PE teacher during the day and during the school year. But he's sponsored or promotes some kind of non-alcoholic beer. I think the flavor the other day was called Run Wild or something like that. So he's up on the top of the mountain, boom, and I'm going to celebrate at the top with a that's whatever. So, and
that's exactly what it is. It's usually, I mean, some people call them summit beers, but if you're just hiking into a lake, maybe there's no summit, but the point is, get out, enjoy it. Because, when you're at that mountaintop, when you're at that lake, there's just really, for me at least, and I think for a lot of people, there's just really no better experience than being there in the moment. And so if you have something cold to enjoy it with, whether it's a beer or it's non-alcoholic or it's, just soda water, that's the best refreshing beverage you're going to have.
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
Well, David, thank you very much. I, again, wholeheartedly appreciate having you on. And actually, I feel like I could continue going on, but I'd instead just actually like to have you back again in the future, and we can just continue the conversation.